Okay, why don't we go ahead and get started. I didn't send out the announcement again today like I had last week, which ended up badly for us. So there aren't very many people on right now, but I'm sure there will be a few that will join as time goes by. Let me get organized here a minute. Okay. First, let me check. Can you hear me? If someone just answers, okay. And can you all see my my display? Okay, good. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. First item, as always, on the agenda is the news from LibLine. There isn't a lot of really new news to report, however, just updates on a few things. There is a test version of 5.20 that is now in the Waldo sandbox, and you are welcome to go in and to look around to try things out. The one thing that I ask that you do is if you find a problem or have a question, send an email to me directly, and I'll do some testing as well and then enter it into the support center. I have a separate account for the testing of 5.20, and I want to make sure that those get reported into the right stream. The 5.20 update to all of your sandboxes won't occur for some amount of time yet. I'm not sure what that time is. I know that the other libraries that are involved with the Code Fusion are now doing some testing, and once they are satisfied that things look okay, then I imagine that we'll be able to get 5.20 in everyone's sandboxes. There are there also was, I had to stop for a minute and think, there also was an upgrade to production this week. I think you all saw the announcement on Waldo support, and there were a few of the fixes that were applied to 5.20 that were back-ported into 5.18. That list did show up on the Waldo support mailing list. If you haven't seen that, check your email, and if you aren't on the mailing list, ask someone at your library who is. Okay, and your question, are there hard-coded lost authorized values in 5.20? I haven't really been able to determine that yet. I've looked at them, and actually I can show you what I have found. If I go into administration and authorized values, you can see that there is a lost and a lost old. The lost old is where my lost statuses were held, are held, and in lost, there's nothing there. So I'm not sure how that lost piece is going to be handled. Let me go over here. Let me see. No, that's not the... I've been cleaning things up here, so yeah, I don't have much that I can show you right now. But I know what I wanted, sorry. I must have cleaned up more than I thought. Okay, I see your message. And I'll get more information on that. Something that I will send into the separate support center account that I have, because that is something that does need to be cleared up. Just thought of another way I can show this. Seems like this is my favorite title, but I'm in the staff mode right now, and you can see that I have one item that I have added a suppress item block or suppress item status to. And if I wanted to go in and look at that and get rid of that status, when I go into here and I click on the lost, I do see all of the, no, let me rephrase that. I see the hard-coded list of the statuses. I do not see the list that I showed you that said lost old. So I find out what they're doing with that and how that is actually going to work for everyone. These 4 statuses were the ones that were identified in the release notes as being the hard-coded ones. I've also read through the user manual information on this, and I didn't find an answer there on that, so I'm going to have to do something different on that. I did notice that there was one thing with the custom statuses. When I first looked at this earlier this week, it had the brief circulation record through sent to bindery, but the suppressed item one hadn't been there. So what I had to do is add that as a custom status, and it didn't appear for me right away. So I have to also look into that and find out why that is, if there's another step that we have to do in order to activate that change. But I'll find out. I'll send a message to the list. Okay. Okay, question, how do the custom statuses work? The custom statuses are described in the Superlibrarian training document. And what it does, you can identify the custom statuses that are the standard ones that they have included in here are the same as the attributes that we have been able to add to items and bid records. And in those situations, what they have identified, and I know this is not a clear screen because all of this information is so small, but what you can do is you can identify, you know, for any one of those different statuses, like a brief circ record, you can identify a note that would be displayed to the or to the person checking the item in or out. In this case, it has check in and out as well as withdrawn identified. The different columns here, hold blocks, you can place or fill holds if any of these are checked. If any column under, or if any checkbox under suppress column is checked, it will suppress those items from display in the catalog. It won't suppress the, I'm sorry, it will suppress the bib record if what you're dealing with is a bib record. And when the situation that has caused that status to be applied is fulfilled, you can choose to have that status auto-filled rather than getting, rather than having to go in and manually change it. And then there are the other IDs. Other than the items suppressed. I haven't really played with any of them yet, so I'll spend time playing with them before our next meeting next week, and I'll let you know what I find. Lori, I suspect that these statuses will affect that going forward. I'll test that and see if that is actually what happens, because if you have an item that is suppressed because it's lost and you are replacing it, you want to be able to add that bibliographic data into your order. And if you can't do it, then that's going to be a problem, because we need to do that. I have not seen any indication that there are any specific custom statuses for that would relate to acquisitions, but it might be that I just haven't found it yet. Okay, so I would suggest that if you want to play around with these custom statuses, feel free to go into the Waldo sandbox, pick out an item, a bib record or two that has items attached, and just play around with the different statuses. They're really easy to change. As I showed you here, you just have to go in, click on the status in the item display, and then choose one of the different custom supplies. If you add a custom status to an item, what you can do to get rid of it is to just click on the X when you come back into this display. So putting on and taking off is relatively easy. Okay, let me go back to the agenda. The enhancement, I'm sorry, the release notes that are out there, I do have those up here somewhere too, I think. Nope, I don't. Anyway, those release notes, I think, are the newest updated ones when you go to that address. And let me just so that you all have it. It would be this one, the cdn.kohalibrary.com/c/docs LibLM Academic Koha 5.20 release notes. And this one, just so that you know, there are 12 pages, and we've looked at pretty much all of, or I've told you about pretty much all of the new features and the enhancements that have been in here. We haven't really spent a lot of time going over the fixes. So that's something that you can rely on this. I'll resend the URL for this particular release notes just in case you don't have them, so that you'll be able to see what you can look for and test in the Waldo sandbox. Okay, let me go back here. The next item that I put on the list, since I sort of combined 1 and 2, is the enhancement list update. And as you recall, we had all of the enhancements listed here. We went through and discussed most of them. There are some that I didn't discuss just because I knew they were things that would get passed on anyway. And last week at the meeting with Patrick and John, they asked me about enhancement ideas, and I said, yes, we have a list and we're working on them. They asked me to identify the top 10 or so. And because I know that the top 10 or so is probably not all that we want to look at, I did go through the list and to a certain extent color-coded what we have here. Anything that's highlighted in green is on my list to send forward. Anything that's highlighted in yellow is something that I left off the list that I'm sending to Patrick to get an estimate on the level of effort. And there are a couple of them here towards the bottom that I have listed, or that I put a pink or red color on, those are ones that if I can get additional information on what this actually, how this actually could possibly work, I would be willing to add those back on as well. Because it's hard to go through and look at these this way, I also added a new page that has the enhancements to send for the level of effort. The reason I'm telling you all of this is because I would like you by the end of, by tomorrow, if possible, to let me know if there are any enhancements that are on the page that I previously showed. Oops. If there are any enhancements here that I skipped that you feel strongly about and that I should add back onto the list that I send to Patrick and John, of course. The reason is that I want to make sure that the things that are important to you are the ones that are requested. I do want to go through this list with, just so that you know which things are on the list. Patrick looked at these. I had shared these with Patrick and John before before we had our meeting last week. And Patrick had gone through and looked at the enhancement list and used as his stand of addressing information as to whether or not the enhancements seemed to be something that applied for all customers or just maybe a few customers. So that was sort of his demarcation line. And he also looked at the enhancements in terms of what would be easy, what would be something that he knew would be even harder. He decided, or he said that he probably would not include into the list. So the things that we have here, I think there are about 15. I went over their top 10 list number, but I'm okay with that. The list here that has a 506 mark field, that's something he said would be very easy for them to do. It probably would take less than 2 minutes. So that one, I decided that's, you know, that's a no-brainer. That one we're going to ask for. The print button, he said that that looked to him like it would benefit everybody. So that he said, yeah, send that one, because that one's an easy one too. He also thought that the enhancement idea about the dead links was a good one. He wasn't quite sure how that would happen or how the programmers would approach it, but he said that it was something that would be useful for everyone. I'm going to skip some of these because we thought they were good anyway in our discussions earlier. All of the, not all, most 4 of the 5 authority ones he asked to have, or he said that definitely they should be passed forward because he knew that there was additional authority work that needed to be done. So those are the ones that were done. The one that he did not recommend sending forward was the one asking for a subfield code or some way to mark records that had been machine generated. The idea behind that is that there's already a field that says it's auto-generated. I pointed out to him during that discussion that even though there's a field for that, there's not a way to get a report based on the contents of that particular field. So we'll see if some of these other things can get done and go back and ask to have those things again. Okay, and then the final ones is the retaining selected mark fields, subfields, throwing others away. And that is something that we've asked for multiple times. And even though he didn't really say anything about this one, I feel strongly about this one for you all, so I made sure it got in here. He also thought this was a good idea to be able, if you're checking something in and it's not already checked out to a patron, to just trigger the count rather than having to once again check it, have it go to a, I'm sorry, I'm getting confused in my words. As it says here, it would obviate the need for the stats-only pseudo-patron, and that makes perfect sense to me. So again, on the enhancements, this list is one that I intend to send to Patrick before the next meeting with him. Usually I meet with him and John on Tuesdays. This next Tuesday, he's going to be out of the office, so we've agreed to cancel the meeting, so it will be a week from next Tuesday when we will meet again, and I would like to have the list sent to him at least a week ahead of time so that he can pass it on to the programmers and get their responses and their ideas back. So if there's something that is not in this list that you think should be, let me know and I'll add it to it and we'll see where it all goes. Any questions, any comments? Anybody want to say something needs to be there right away anyway? Okay, let me go back to our agenda then. The ebook delete record handling. This is something that has been frustrating for a lot of libraries and one that continues to amaze me. I've been working with Marymount Manhattan in order to get records deleted, and we did get the script to run. It was able to delete some records, but it did not delete the entire file of the records that came. I spent some time looking through the bibliographic records themselves and then searching against the database in order to see if those records even existed in the database. And if they did, tried to find out why the record on the delete file from the vendor didn't actually find the record. And what I found through most of that, and I think Teresa, you can probably confirm this too, is that the ISBN numbers didn't match in most cases. There was a file that had over 500 records, I think it was 581 or something, and only 74 records were deleted out of that set, which means that there's still a substantial amount that still would require some kind of manual handling. When the last time that I talked to Teresa, which was a couple of weeks ago, we tried to figure out a way to find a unique field in either the delete record or in the bibliographic record to try and create a report that would come up or that we could use to identify those records that needed to be deleted. And we sort of negated each other's suggestion. So I said I would talk to Michelle and find out if she had any ideas. So I sent the file that had the large amount of records and that only had 74 deleted. And I asked for additional information from Michelle. She looked at the record. She tried to find a way that that would be a unique situation for all of the records. We looked at the 040 field, we looked at the 035 field. We tried looking at everything. I suggested using the 020 subfield Z because I did find in some cases that those matched, but we couldn't come up with a fail-safe method that would get everything. So after talking about it and thinking about it for a while, Michelle came back and suggested that that the vendor needs to be notified that their delete records are not matching the records that have been loaded into the database. The delete records from the file that I looked at for Marymount Manhattan showed that you don't get a complete bib record back. So you only get a very brief information. Basically, you get the ISBN, the title, the publisher, and I'm trying to remember what else. There wasn't much else information in there. What we don't know is how the vendors identify the records. What Michelle and I are speculating is that the records that were first delivered to you many years ago have evolved over time, and ISBN numbers change and the records themselves change. So the information that they're sending to you as deletes isn't necessarily the same information that they sent you when they provided the bibliographic records initially. So, so what we are speculating is that letting the vendors know that their delete files are not working for you, I think, is about the only thing that I can suggest at this point in time. It's not a good situation. When I talked with Teresa, I asked if there was a way to tell if it's an old record. Can we delete it just because it's old? And of course, the answer is no, we can't, because some of the titles are purchased. So far, the vendors that we've been working with are the current vendors ProQuest, but the records that were loaded happen to be eBrary records, and you know, in all of the and the takeovers and everything, it's hard to know how those records were transferred. So I haven't worked with any of the EBSCO records yet. I suspect I'd find the same kind of situation though. So I think, you know, we're started on this pathway, but we don't have a real good solution yet. But I think that one of the factors we need to look into is asking the vendors to be a little bit more helpful in identifying what needs to be deleted. The delete records themselves, when I brought them into MarkEdit, they looked fine. They had the D in the position in the leader where they needed to be, and if they matched on the ISBN, that helped. If there were additional match points that were included in the delete record, it would help. The ones that I can think of easily are if the 010 was included, the LCCN number, even if the classification number, either in the 050 or the 090 were there, it would be another data point that could match, because it's unlikely the call number would have changed from the time the first record was delivered until the time the delete record was delivered. Oh yeah, you could do that, Stephen, if they are all in one specific when you say they're not associated with a particular library, are you talking about a collection or a shelving location or something that would be identified in an item record? Okay, yeah, that should be doable. There is a feature in the reports module that if you can pull, if you can find all of your records through an SQL report, you can and have just the biblio number as the only output of that report. There is an option when you download your report to download it as a delete file that can then be processed through the Manage Mark record. feature. Let me show you, let me see if I can think of a report that I have that might have some data in it. Let's see. Okay, there are no saved reports. You try this one. I'll run that report, and if I can't find something else that has either counts in it, okay, that's going to be useless. I can't remember the last reports that I ran in here. But in the okay, in this report, what I did is I had SQL that just looked for a specific tag. And when you get to your export to, there is a bibliorecord batch option in the export options. If you take that out, you can then send it back through the manage MARC records, and that will delete the records. They'll all be identified as delete records as they go through. So that is one way that that can happen. It takes a little bit longer, but it's very effective. Okay. I know that there are.
Becky?
Yeah, go ahead.
We also have all of our eBray records that I want to get rid of. They all have an 001 that starts with EBR.
Mm-hmm. You can do that report. Let's see if I still have it up here. You can use this SQL, and instead of looking for tag 0915, you could look for tag 001 and use the LAK eBrary, and then you'd be able to find those records. You wouldn't need all the extra stuff there, but definitely that would find all of the records. You could then export it as a batch that goes into the bibliorecord batch. And okay, I skipped over a part here. One of the options that's available in the batch record, sorry, I'm confusing myself here. But one of the options that can be used in the import-export factory, if I can click on the right thing here, there are two different ones. There's one to delete using MARC records. The other one is to delete bibs using a spreadsheet. And the the report that is done to find records by a specific tag and a matching qualifier can then be run through this delete bibs using a spreadsheet. And if you can get the file like that, I can make sure that I can make sure Michelle puts this into your database so that you can then run that file through this particular job to get it set so that it will delete the bib records. What this particular option does is it basically goes through all of the records that you have listed in the spreadsheet, and it marks them all as deleted records. So when it goes through the managed staged records and adds them into the database, they go away. Yes, I will make that SQL available.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll ask Michelle to put that over onto your database, Stephen, so we can get that done. And I'll make sure that you can I'll get that SQL sent to the mailing list today so that you can play around with it and make sure you get the records that you want.
Great, thanks.
Mm-hmm. Now, the problem for Marymount Manhattan is that we've been working from the MARC records, and I've compared the MARC record file with the spreadsheet file that they sent, and the biggest problem with that is that the match point, there's no match point to the bibliographic record in the database. It has the same data that's in the file that we use as the MARC record, or that was used as a MARC record, but there's no way to create a report in LAK that will pull the same records that are in the file. So we have those kind of curious situations to deal with. Teresa, just so you know, I'll get in touch with you again and try and figure out what you need to tell your vendor, because they need to be aware that their delete files are not doing the job for you. And again, this was ProQuest handling eBrary records. So we'll see what we can get done.
So have you considered deleting all of the records and then reloading the ones that are still good?
We have, but there's no easy way to know which ones would. As far as I know, and Teresa, you can tell me or not, there's no way to know which ones were purchased permanently versus those that were just there for whatever your purchase length term was. Yeah, Teresa's confirming that. So
that it used to be with eBrary that you could download those, and they were specifically separated out, so you could either download them all, or you could download the subscription, or you could download the ones that you'd purchased. Is that no longer the case?
I don't know. Teresa, do you know if that's the case? Okay, well, that's another question that we'll make sure we ask the vendor.
Yeah.
Now, with JSTOR, if any of you are receiving ebooks from JSTOR, I'm not sure how widely how they will work with customers, but I do know that every now and again I will get a complete new file of everything that is currently available, and I can then delete everything that is in the database from that vendor, from JSTOR, and then reload the new file. But I'm not sure if they would do that for everyone or if they're just doing that for us. I don't know. So the saga continues on how to get records deleted that need to go away. And I wish I had a better answer for you, but you know, the more that we dig into it, the more we find that there's just not an easy way. But we'll get something figured so we have several different options. Okay, because 5.20 is now in the Waldo sandbox, I'll go ahead and set this up so that the item holdings will display in the search results. The other piece of this that I recall reading about in the release notes is that every piece of the availability information now has a class associated with it. So you'd be able to hide things that you don't want to have displayed in the availability thing. Like the example I showed you with the one bib record is I had one item suppressed, but it still said that there were 4 of 4. I would rather not have it say that there are 4 items when only 3 of them are displaying to the user. So that's something that I would want to hide. And that is something that is possible now. There's more options that are available. But I think that one of the first things that I need to do is set some of that up so that you can see it in the sandbox. Okay. The last issue that I have on the agenda that we were going to talk about last week was the import patron question that Stephen had put out on the Waldo support list. Stevie, you want to talk to that just a little bit? I know that this is something that libraries use.
So it turns out that the problem we were having with loading the record was related to something called a BOM, B-O-M, a bit order mark. That's basically an invisible kind of metadata character that tells the program what format the file is in this case UTF-8. It was trying to import that as part of the field name. And of course, there is no matching field name for that, plus system number, plus patron number. And so it was just not matching on any and not importing any card numbers. So there's no way to see this in Excel or Notepad. You either have to use Notepad++, or you have to figure out a way to get your system to download the records without the BOM.
Can I just speak to this a little bit? Because I've been working with Michelle on importing patrons. We use an institution ID. So that's a static in our system, and the barcode changes. So when we matched against barcode, we were getting like many, many duplications, thousands and thousands of them. And I would have to go in and clean them up. So I have to do double matching. That makes sense. I do a barcode. I have to think of the sequence I do them in. But I do have to do a barcode match, and then I have to go back and do an institution match. And if it's either that way or the opposite way, I can't remember. I have to look at my notes, but it's the only workaround I could ever come up with, because I stopped importing for a long time because it was so problematic, and it created such a mess out of the patrons.
Horrible.
It was horrible. It didn't really work right. She actually walked with me. We walked through the process like for 2 days over 2 different phone calls, and we finally came up with something that works basically. So now I can actually do, because we import, and change expiration dates for, 25,000 people, sometimes more, because I separate them out. So our employee file is separate from the student file, but it's a lot of people. So I can't have duplications. It's a mess. So it was really a mess, and I stopped doing it because I would make people do manual updates because it was just, there wasn't all the right. We just finally figured it out in like September last year, but it does seem to work. I can send you the way that we do it, Stephen, but it's like, I didn't know if anybody else was using that other checkpoint. So that's why I really didn't share it, because I feel like St. John's was like the one that insisted on institution ID because we use it, but I don't know if anybody else does. Most people swap out the barcode and then that's the checkpoint. In St. John's, you could get a new ID card and it might give you a new barcode, but your institution ID is your consistent info.
No, I mean, there's nothing wrong with the data. It's just that there's this strange thing that they're no longer recommending that these files be tagged with this, but we have an old legacy registration system, so there's nothing we can do to fix that. We just have to fix the files.
Okay, there might be another thread that comes in on this one once we do get to 520, because in 520 the system will keep track of replaced barcodes. So maybe it will make things easier, but I can see that it might also make it more difficult. So if you change a person's barcode in their patron record, supposedly, I haven't tested this yet, but supposedly it will keep the old patron barcode in the patron record as well. So it just struck me that matching patrons is going to be maybe something that will have to be looked at to see if we can limit it just to active barcodes or if it can be active and inactive barcodes.
It's hard to do that. It's really tricky because unless you can get the system to automatically bump it down to like a barcode 2 or 3 or some sort of an inactive, it's tough to get it to understand. What it does is, because it doesn't find on that match point, it just creates another record. You know, and then you get one patron with 5 accounts.
Right.
You know, if you get a kid that loses his ID card all the time or whatever. So it's really a tricky, I don't know I've thought about it from a coding side, and I don't know what the right answer is. Because it's just the nature of, you know, the beast. That's why we started to go with institution ID, because that was the checkpoint. That was the only consistent over the course of your college career. You would keep that one number. So even if 5 people had exactly the same name, everybody had a different institution ID. But for a long time, you couldn't match against institution ID. It just didn't work. It would kick it out as an error, and it just never worked. This workaround seems to be working for now, knock wood. But God, I'm not sure what's going to happen when they change it.
Yeah, we'll have to keep an eye out for that and see if we can somehow test it before 520 goes into production.
Okay.
It sounded a little bit like to me like that import script needs to be reworked. And that isn't part of Code Fusion, so that might be something we'll need to talk about in another month or two on how we're going to handle that. That might actually be an enhancement that we would want to have on our enhancement list. But until we know what the complications might be, it's kind of hard to write it up and describe it.
Yeah, true.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm glad, Stephen, that they helped you find a way to get around this. But we'll still be faced with the patron import problems, I think.
Yeah, it would certainly be nice if it ignored the bomb and just processed the real data. But
well, and we don't all want to have to learn how to read ASCII codes, so or hex codes or the decimal codes or whatever way you can read those characters in. I think
there's a program called Notepad++ that I have to download and then import and export the data again in a different format, so it doesn't have that. A little complicated, but doable.
At least the program exists.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so is there anything else that anyone wants to bring up today? Okay, I don't see any additional chat messages, and I don't see anybody unmuting themselves. So let me explain a little bit first before we go what problem I had last week. There were a couple of things that happened that I had no control over, and they weren't even things that happened on the same day. First thing is that the Waldo mail server is now on an Exchange server. So that has changed all of the connections and everything, in the way that I had GoToMeeting integrated into Outlook before didn't work once we went to the Exchange server. So that was one problem. Then the second problem is that GoToMeeting changed the way that they have you log in. So I was confronted with trying to get the software set up for doing these meetings, but the biggest complicator is that GoToMeeting hadn't notified me that they had changed their method of connecting me to a meeting. So after I figured all of that out, I set up several meetings with myself and tested it and made sure that everything is working. And now it is working well, and the meetings that I've set up for the rest of the academic year has already gone out to you, and we will meet next week so that we get back on our regular schedule, and hopefully it will all go forward smoothly. And with that, that's all that I've got today. Hopefully by next week, I'll have more testing done in 5.20 on the sandbox, and I can show you more things that I find. Thank you all.